Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on November the 9th, 2014. I hope you're all ready for this incredible winter you're going to have. If you thought last winter was bad enough in the good parts of Canada and the States, and elsewhere for that matter, because we really are under tremendous weather control, basically. It's weather control. Stuff that started off as weather warfare a long, long time ago is now weather control across a good part of the planet. And most folk don't know because they don't look up from the little gadgets they're playing with all the time. And it's so much fun, apparently. But it's just astonishing how rapidly each agenda, which is set out and talked about and published in many, many articles over many, many years, sometimes 100 years, come to fruition, and you can see them happening in your lifetime. The things that people are conditioned often to accept are coming along through their movies and their other eco movements and all the different things that you hear about all the time, and their brainwashing at school too, where they really push all the new stuff for that generation that's going to face it all, so that they'll accept it much more easily. It always comes true, because you see, and I'll touch on this tonight too, as smart cities, things like that, but you're under, everything's smart now. Smart cars, smart bombs, smart, you name it, everything's smart, except the general population, apparently. And they do surveys on the population constantly to see that your IQ is constantly plummeting. So they're on routes with their agenda, up to date with where they want to be at this particular time, as we all seem to be turned into zombies. And it's quite fascinating to me to read some of the big players' own books about it, like Brzezinski and so on, when they go through, say, technotronic technology and warfare used on the general populations by their own governments, which would pacify them or make them angry or depressed or whatever it happens to be, just by altering the frequencies. Old technology again, but it's everywhere now with cell towers across the whole planet. So we're under smart management, you see. Everything's smart management. Smart schools, smart management, smart buses to get them to school and back, and smart cars, etc., which means that what used to be left to you, all the decision-making in the cars and so on, are really up to the guys who put the programs in and are constantly monitoring it. I can, the other night on a late-night radio show, there was a guy who gets phenomenal money for some TV show he has on cars. It's been going on for an awful long time. The same kind of guys that give you the write-ups on automobiles, and it's just like the old gourmet things. The guys who were gourmets and would give chefs and restaurants great write-ups, or bad ones, depending on how he felt, or who was paying him to give them a bad one. And you find that, and also obviously giving them a good pay to under the table to give them a good one. It's the same with cars and everything else too. And this guy was all lauding all the wonderful technology of new cars and all the rest of it. It was quite fascinating to listen to his guff. Good term, that, good name, guff, you see. We don't use it enough today. And the guff was just flowing out of this guy with all their smart chips and cars and smart everything, and how they can even program your car remotely from all the cell towers and so on, and update the computer in it. Of course, you won't know it's been done, or even what they've done to it. Never mind hacking the darn thing when you're driving it, and maybe giving you a Lady Di maneuver in a tunnel somewhere. But the thing is, this is old technology, but they're going full steam ahead now that the chips are so cheap, getting all made in China, you see. But everything's smart, and it's all to take control away from you in every area of your life. Quite fascinating and quite funny in some ways, because life is rather funny, especially the way we accept everything that comes our way. I've even noticed the people at the gas pumps, when they're going in, they don't complain as much as they used to do. I used to hear them bitching all the time with a few cents going up in a litre or a gallon. But now it's just all quiet and accept things. They've been trained to accept everything. Isn't that amazing, that, eh? But we're constantly being worked on by the smart guys that give you smart everything. And they know, since they're smart, how you should live and work and behave and all the rest of it. Because we're pretty dumb, apparently, you see. it was quite interesting to go into the old histories of the class society as opposed to this supposed classless society, which has never existed. But the class society is alive and well. And one of the worst classes really is the middle class ones who work in technology for their masters, the really stinking rich elite ones, the 1%. And how snobbish they've become with all their organizations as they flatter each other and pat each other on the back for being so clever and managing whole herds of people. And of course, the more they use terminology like that, and they do use that kind of terminology, the more they despise the herd that they're supposed to be managing. And that truly is a human trait. And it will always be with us, unfortunately, I think. And you can make anybody like that a real snob. You can. I mean, I've told the story about the postman in the last place I lived, how they gave him a hat. He never had a hat before that. They gave him a hat. And by God, this guy turned into a little major domo and started going around. And I saw him measuring the heights of the post box off the ground, place after place, and leaving notes there about fines and fees if you didn't comply. Even though you're on a dirt road, and the height kept altering according to the gravel they'd put on it. It would lower it, you see. And then it would get worn down, and then the post would be higher again. So, and I had words with this guy a few times. And then they gave him a little sign for his car, postman. And he got even worse. He got even worse. And so I said, you better give us special post boxes here, ones we can crank up and down to suit you, And then he started, it wasn't far enough from the side of the road, etc., etc. Well, the road itself kept winding and narrowing according to all the gravel they put down, and it would get flattened down again. But that's how people are. I know a woman who had cows, milking cows, and she had a lead cow that she put the bell on, and for years the rest of them would follow, you see, no problem at all. And eventually she changed the bell on a different one, and this passive cow suddenly became aggressive to the rest of them and rather nasty. These traits seem to be all through the living species. It's just astonishing, isn't it? It really is astonishing. But yeah, you give really nobodies, and there's lots of nobodies today that are made somebodies by the movements that are being designed by the elite to take more control into their own hands and away from all of you. And they use these middlemen to take over and manage us all, you see, in a more smart fashion. It's just absolutely fascinating to see how it all works and how snobbish they become. It's like the old stories about the employees of the very wealthy houses, the staff in the 1800s and in the early 1900s, and how the staff themselves become more snobbish than the folk that they worked for. And that's true, A lot of them did. Because they despised the folk outside, mainly because they were afraid of them. Otherwise, if they weren't working in that big house and cleaning the floors and taking away the chamber pots, they might be working in some rotten, dirty factory somewhere, and they'd have to be one of them. Quite amazing, isn't it? Sad thing. And it's true, you see, humanity really is not logical. There are many traits built into humanity that others have studied for an awful long time, centuries and centuries and centuries. And that's why Bernays was so successful. Because they came from a long, long lineage of people who studied, purchasers, people who bought things from people like themselves, their ancestors. And they could find all the traits out, and the snobbish traits, and what appeals to snobbery too, to be different. People forget, in fact, that even in the 1800s, even in other countries, in earlier periods, certain things couldn't be worn by the peasantry. And when silk came out too, it was forbidden in England for ordinary folk to wear any kind of silk. It's kind of a joke too, because they couldn't afford it. But if they could afford it, it'd have been a really big offence to wear it. You'd be pretentious, you see. And the elite have to have all that kind of thing. And also when you go into the histories of France especially, one of the most decadent countries at times in history, where the big ladies in the 17 and 1800s had huge parties and balls and all that. And they would order their finery, that their dressing and jewelry and so on, get them specially made just for that one party. And they wouldn't wear it again. Isn't that something? And there was one of them wore a bird cage in her hair. They made them so darned high, it was like 3 stories high, just to be different than all the rest. Vanity and pomposity. Quite something, isn't it? Scary, that. Now, the wise people, of course, down through the ages, studied us, all of us. And they knew how they could manipulate us, because we're not quite logical. You see, this thing called humanity. We're human. Human is not if you're human, you're not a robot. You're not Mr. Spock in Star Trek. You have other things, other drives, all these things working subconsciously. And you have emotions. You have a lot of emotions all working sometimes against each other at times. And they're not quite logical because of it. You have fancies for things. You fancy things now and then, which again is our emotional thing as opposed to a necessity, something which is necessary. So this has been well studied, how we really, really tick. And that's how we're so well managed too. Especially today, you live in such big cities, the super cities, because Plato talked about it, that this new order would come in through cities, the construction of cities, artificial constructions, where an artificial society would be set up. Because people inside cities exist to create some other abstract thing called money, as opposed to just growing what you need and eating it and so on, or hunting. You use coinage for money, some kind of currency, and everything that you need in a city must be brought into you in the city. Therefore, the cities would be the dynamos, in a sense, to bring in and dominate the world. And now we have super cities, and again down to smart cities. Commerce rules, you see. And once again, in the city, because you're in an artificial construction, you've been brought up with a lot of traits that you don't know you actually have, and a lot of little fears you don't know you actually have, because as you're growing up, you'll start to realize before you earn money, that money's a real necessity in the city, and that creates a fear if you don't have it. Therefore, you either compensate for it and go through university and go into economics and things like that, and make lots of cash, or become a chartered accountant. Because folk who make money off of folk making money, as opposed to actually making something useful. That's how the world really is. The cabinet maker and so on, at the bottom, they don't make the cash. It's all the middlemen above them who make the cash, and the guys that live off of them. There's a whole business industry living off of you. And then you add modern government into it, and now you got a huge monster living off of you, all for good purposes, supposedly, with all their different agencies and so on. So we're told. And they live better than you do, and you're at the bottom actually making things that are useful and necessary. You see. It's a fantastic system, and very few folks stop to analyze it and think about it. Because they're kept, as Plato said, they must have lots of entertainment in a city. They're kept entertained. Since really, you just can't go for a walk in the country in the city, unless you're way on the outskirts. In some cities, it's just all flat, or motorways around it. So you can't just head off and get lost for the day and come back later on. In a walk, that is. And therefore everything must be entertained within the city. Artificial entertainment. In the old days, folk entertained themselves. Not so long ago, by the way. Children did the same thing. They lived in little towns and villages, and they'd be off for the whole day somewhere else, exploring streams and brooks and climbing trees and all that kind of thing. And they were never bored. Never bored. Plus they were healthy because they got a lot of exercise. Obesity was unknown. But today, everything is artificial. And the more artificial it becomes, the more artificial the people become. Because then they think it's normal to have all these extra gadgets and so on to keep you entertained. And the gadgets themselves aren't just entertaining you, they're conditioning you for the next part of the agenda, for the eco-friendly stuff and all that stuff that all the big corporations are in on. Even though the big corporations, they supposedly are the biggest polluters, because it's got nothing to do with reality. It's agenda-driven. Everything's agenda-driven. Absolutely everything. You all know of the Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century, put up by the United Nations, and the Millennium Project. They've got different names for the same thing. And as soon as the public and the dissenters, as they call folk who are aware of it, you're now a dissenter, you see, because you chat about it, then they change the names all the time, and even had that on the website too, from the United Nations, to use this or that, or a whole half a dozen terms they're using for it now. Sustainability is another term for the same thing. Smart growth is another term. Things like that. And the whole idea is to get you living into communes, communitarian areas, you see, where you can get managed, because you're not going to be driving about, maybe even 20 years' time, maybe less than 20 years, in fact. Drastically reduced by 2021. So you'll be stuck in your little communitarian area, and you'll be living in austerity, which means basic essentials, but they'll still make sure you get lots of apps and cheap gadgets and things to keep you entertained, and get your direct orders from the agencies that are all running you. It's all planned, and it's getting implemented in different countries in the world right now, in fact. They've tested it out on islands across the world, different parts of it as well, to iron out the flaws. So it'll work seamlessly when they put it in. So we're constantly being managed, because we're in the age of this is the century of change, the 21st century, according to academia, and all the old ideas that have been, all the control freaks have drooled over, have to come to fruition in this century. Vast population reduction for a post-consumerist and a post-productive society. And also into austerity and the greening thing, which means that you'll be living, eating vegetables like the old days, the old feudal system, and meat will be a very rare thing for you, while the elite themselves will still be having their 20-course big dinner parties and so on, and eating the best steaks and so on, and etc., etc. But not for you. Not for you. You see, your genes don't warrant it, apparently, because you're not successful. Even though you might think you're successful and getting along, and you have, you might think you're actually middle class. Middle class is quite something else, you know. A lot of folk in the US surprisingly think they're middle class, whereas in the UK they wouldn't be considered a middle class in the UK system. The middle class in the UK used to mean literally you always wore a suit and tie, always, and you owned your own property completely. Things like that, you see. So even what was given to the general population to be middle class is not really true. And the upper middle class in Britain were called somebodies. It's a term used at royal parties when people would come through the door and be announced, and the king or the queen, right into the 20th century, would ask, who's that? Oh, that's Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. And the king would say, is he a somebody? Because you had to be a somebody to be accepted into the lower strata of that particular class, the lower strata. And nothing really has changed. Today you have to be ruthless, psychopathic, and awfully successful as a psychopath to get up there. Awfully successful. When you look at who rules the world and does the work, because those at the top don't believe in work. They really don't believe in work. Anyone who works is not part of themselves. And the top, say 1%, for instance, have managers who manage the wealthy people's finances and investments for them. They're more powerful, technically, than many of the more naive of the groups that get up into that category and actually own the money. They're more powerful because they have their organizations. And they can meet together and design systems of investment for all these different rich people and put them into their green investments of controlling communitarian aspects of society that's coming in. That's how it's done. The CEOs that manage all the big groups of insurance for pensions and so on, investments and things like that, they're more powerful because they again have their groups and their circles and their clubs and organizations. And now they have a massive amount of money, although it technically belongs to other people, and they decide where it's all going to go and how it's going to go and what conditions are put on it when it goes to do something. That's how the world is really run. So it makes a mockery of this farce that's always pushed in your face called democracy. But democracy was always a farce. The idea is utopian, but the reality is always a farce, you see. Because you can't get a utopia with human nature being human nature, which isn't always logical. There's more to us than pure logic. There is emotion, lots of emotions. Lots and lots of emotions. And your emotions will often change according to your age group and the milestones you go through traveling through life and the wisdom acquired and so on. Your opinions will too on different things. Even the things you condemned, often when you're young, and your parents, you'll end up doing the same thing yourself. And you'll understand why it happened to your parents, things like that. Whereas before, you'd be fighting them. Because you're different, you see. You're special, you're different. And you belong to the new generation, as your teachers keep telling you. Then you're getting used again for other agendas, and you don't even know it. You don't know it. A good documentary to watch, by the way, is that 1%. The 1% is called. And I think it was made by the son of the Johnson & Johnson family. And he interviews his parents too, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Where really, their parents really don't know so much. Those particular groups, they don't know so much of even how the money's run. But they're big managers that belong to other big groups and other big families for investment. They know where it's going and why it's going, and they'll belong to organizations they won't tell you on the documentary. They're more powerful in a sense. I always think of Bernays. Bernays said that in the early days of marketing and mass advertising and so on, he said, rather than just publish lots of leaflets for advertising and so on, he says, send agents out. Send them out into communities. But before you go do your homework, look at the phone books. See what churches are there as an example, what organizations exist, all kinds of organizations. Find out who's the head guy of every organization and go and see them. Get them on board. And by the way, that also means pay them under the table if need be to get them on board. And the followers that pastor, whoever he happens to be, or community organizer, whoever he has following him, will be the unwitting dupes and tools to be used to push your agenda. That's what he said. This is a guy who advised presidents galore and created the consumerist society. Technically, he was one of them. It was a huge, massive organization behind him. He was one of the front men. But it was also to start shaping cultures, whole cultures of nations. Not just the US. And also how to get them into wars and use them for wars. Whole nations to be used for wars for private business. And he actually did it in the US. He used the US to invade a place in South America. Because one of his biggest clients was the United Fruit Company. And the country had elected its own leader in a democratic election. And the people demanded wages and so on, better wages rather than slave wages they were getting for this private corporation that previously run the whole country, a US corporation. And so Bernays created a whole movie like the Path News for cinemas. and just bombarded them with this communist now and government communism, and oh, it's on your borders, the US, oh. And the US eventually sent troops down there, got the guy out. Nixon was there too, apparently. And they even planted communist books on the president's tables, etc., to say, see, he was a communist. No, he wasn't. And things went back to normal. The United Fruit Company, the biggest client that Bernays had, ran it as always had done afterwards. But he used the US taxpayer to do it all for private business. And that's never stopped, by the way. Never stopped. Now, from that era of Bernays, when he first started off, he was involved in everything, including the setting up of the League of Nations for President Wilson. And of course, the group behind Bernays himself had bigger plans for the world. And we're living through it today. But Bernays, as I say, really paved the way more openly, as to how it's done, and whole instruction courses and universities and so on were based on his marketing ideas. Not just marketing, but how to manipulate whole populations of people to buy your particular rotten product. In other words, it's perception management. That's the key to everything. Whereas before, you see people had to come out and people who made small engines, say like generators and things like that, things that were useful, they had to live on their reputation. They had to create something that actually worked and was pretty good and lasted a long time. Little maintenance or easy maintenance and things like that. Where Bernays' idea was to cheapen the product and just tell people it's better. Oh, thousands say. Thousands say it's great. Little statements like that will actually work. Isn't that amazing? Whereas the old ads were very staid. You can depend on us. Then they'd tell you the details why you should buy this small engine or this lawnmower, whatever it happened to be. They'd tell you how it was built, how it was sturdy, the gauge of steel that was on it. It wouldn't just rust out in a few years. The kind of engine that was in it, things like that. And but then he did away with all that until you're sold the dream. Here's your car on the road. A road is a virtual road today, and you're the only car on it, with all these mountains and lakes to pass and all that. And there's no cops behind you watching the speed limit. And by God, it's all yours with this fancy-looking piece of tin with wonderful paint on it. Everyone's got a great paint job to make you buy it. It looks like a car, but it's not really anymore. It's junk. Junk. With built-in obsolescence. And built-in, every part will just deteriorate so fast. They know exactly even how many ups and downs that front shock absorber is going to take before it packs in. They knew that back in the 60s, for goodness sake. That's how everything's designed. But now, using the Bernays techniques, they've trained the public that junk is normal. Because it looks new. And they've trained them to throw out the old and buy new. Even though the new will only last 2 or 3 months and it's bust and you buy new again, if it's a vacuum or whatever it happens to be. Looks like a vacuum. It's nice and shiny plastic. Brand new. Things like that. How easy it is to con the people. Now, when they can con you so easily, and they have you trained now into this format, they can con you with everything, and they do. The news has got worse since Bernays pulled that United Fruit Corporation stunt, create his own news industry, just to blacken a country and using propaganda and lies, and get the country invaded by the US military for his private company. And it's so far ahead now that everything is propaganda today. I don't think there's an article out there that has any actual or any real factual basis. Most of the articles today are to program you into accepting something. Most of the articles that fly, you'll find that it's giving you false paradigms, they call it, and false choices. When in reality, you don't have to take any choice. They're giving you this or that. They're both false, but they both lead you up the garden path in the same direction. That's how perfectly understood we are and how perfectly manipulated we truly are. They set the choices, not you. And the opting out choice is never really there. So, we're in the age of perfect management pretty well. And if you think it's perfect now, wait until another 10 years' time, if we're around by that time. And you'll see how perfectly well it's all managed. Now, they brought in the carbon taxes in California and pollution taxes, things like that. Other states are following suit. So some in the US have already followed it. Canada's very quiet about it, but they'll simply do it in a very clever little way, not to cause any ripples. And the public will eventually catch on through word of mouth as they get hit to the gas pumps or whatever it happens to be, whoever way they're going to pay it. And you'll find out that way, because Canada's more of a colony. It's not that colony mentality where they don't have to tell the public very much at all. It's rather strange that Australia is kind of much the same in a sense, although Australians in the last 10 years or so are far more observant of what their governments are up to. But that's the kind of that perfect management. That's the key to everything. And it's amazing to me, with all that goes on, the important things that matter to you personally are completely brushed aside and forgotten with the deluge of stories, real, half-true, and fake. Because you're constantly bombarded on a daily basis with junk called news. What is news? You can make up any story and call it news. It's new. That's where news comes from. It's new. It's a new story. And that's what they do. That's what they do. Quite amazing. Even though a US Supreme Court judge a few years ago, well, a case involving Monsanto, said that the news doesn't have to tell the truth. There's nothing written anywhere. There's no agreement made anywhere that news must be true. And now that you're fed propaganda with the bills in the States especially, they put through the old techniques of using the Voice of America techniques on countries outside the US for propaganda purposes can now be used on all the American citizens too. They don't have to do that in Canada or Britain because they've been doing that forever. They don't have these different rules. They can do what they want, in a sense. And they do. They do. Especially when you have big companies, television companies and radio companies, which are owned technically by the government. And everybody on board is sworn to secrecy at times as to how they operate. And they're an arm of government. Very, very effective for propaganda purposes. Like something else. This is the age of maximizing greed. Another term for profit today. As taught in universities, that greed is good. Milton Friedman, you see. And there's no conscience whatsoever. The whole idea in commerce is to sell things. Doesn't matter what you're selling or how well or poorly it's made. Just get it sold and use perception management to sell it all. Con the public. Get the money. And it's buyer beware time. It's their own fault if the schmucks bought it. That's how it's figured. That's normal tuition today in these different fields. I mean, look at cars today. They're so chintzy put together. Forget the nice shiny paint and nice contours, etc., and the lovely ads you've seen. They're put together with junk. Thin steel. Nice, thick, shiny paint, though. It looks like it's rather solid, but it's all mainly paintwork. And the rest is plastic. And you can go around a new car and see everything that's going to fall apart in no time at all. And you're going to pay something like it's a mortgage to buy a car these days. How they've altered the perceptions of the general population so fast, and their logic and their critical evaluation of things so easily done in such a short span of time, really. And if something is going to start falling apart after 3 or 5 years, and you're still paying it off, as I say, it's about a mortgage today. Why don't you just say this is junk? Is there anything out there that's not junk? And I tell you, it's a hard thing to find things that aren't, unless you're really into big, big money. And even then, the bodies are going to rust apart and so on. However, the guy I mentioned earlier who had this TV show on autos and so on, apparently isn't completely enthused by all the eco stuff that's coming through for the cars. Absolutely enthused. Naturally he's enthused. He gets paid for being enthused by the big manufacturers himself. And he says, oh yeah, and we're on the road to smaller engines. You see? for it to be eco-friendly, smaller engines, but they'll still be in rather mid-size or even large-size vehicles because they're going to turbocharge them, blast more air into the intakes, and that'll give the impression that it's zippy and all the rest of it. But let me tell you something. You see, I was brought up in Britain, and Britain was always making small cars for the people. And these small cars, generally little four-cylinder jobs, the engines burned out in about 70,000 miles, sometimes before it, because it's high RPM. Everything's moving much faster to go at the same speed. And the laws of physics go through them all, and it simply wears much, much faster. Very simple, folks. You can soup up a Honda 50cc to do 100 mile an hour. It's been done in the past. Something the size of a moped. But it'll burn it out in no time at all. You just can't get past that. You have the capacity or you don't. And the other thing this guy was enthused about was they're going to bring in aluminum bodies. Oh, aluminum. Aluminum bodies. It'll be slightly hardened aluminum, which will crack right along its length if you get a little knock. But never mind trying to paint aluminum. You get special acid primers and things to get anything to stick to it. But salt will destroy aluminum in no time at all. The winter roads will destroy it completely. And you're going to get all the different electrical things happening with it, with the dissimilar metals as you bolt this to any kind of steel whatsoever. All this burn holes around the bolts. This is an improvement. Meaning, and the companies are all on board for the big car because the car manufacturers, never mind the cheap bauxite where they make aluminum from across Africa, and that's really dirt cheap for them. Their prices won't go down though, even though their profits will go way up, making it a lot cheaper again. But the thing is that your car will fall apart faster if you buy another one, you see. So it's good for business for them. Everything under eco is a racket. A complete racket. It really is. Complete racket. It used to astonish me, but when I first saw American cars, the old boat-type cars, big long things with wonderful suspensions on them, and these things could ride along the roads and never feel a bump, generally, not like today. And of course, gas at that time was cheap in the US, for sure. But those things were transcontinental cars. They could literally go coast to coast across thousands and thousands of miles because they were designed for that. Big engines, V8s, things like that. So they'd last longer that way. You can do the same thing with a small car. Sure, you can do it, put enough cash into it, and the manufacturer can churn out something that'll go coast to coast. By the time it gets from coast to coast, it's going to be burned out in the engine department and other things as well. You can't get away from the higher revolutions per minute. Can't do a small engine to get the same speed and so on. But these are the cons that are pulled in society all along. And that's why the big corporations are all on board with this eco stuff, because it means more money for them, bigger profits, and selling you even worse junk. They'll have to be replaced even faster than the present junk they sell you. I can remember a guy in Britain a long time ago who was on television who I was so fed up with the nonsense problems with vehicles, especially rust, because in Britain, the Ford company especially was notorious for it, and they've been charged many times at the time for even, they showed you hidden cameras that were, or cameras that guys would put over the walls and plants and the yards and plants, and you could see them being brought out of the where the bodies had been welded together, and they'd leave them outside in the rain, no primer, nothing on them, and to get rust started in the vehicles. That was the normal procedure. And then another time they did it in the same plant. You saw one of the foremen, and he had a chisel, and he was scraping it just below the windshield wiper blades on the metal there, and everybody had noticed that's where this particular model always started rusting. Things like that. But what do you see in the ads? Oh, a car you can trust. All that kind of stuff. This is, again, getting back to what I said about human nature. This is human nature. because we're not just logical. And believe you me, the whole legal system, which is also a big con as well, run often by criminals themselves and monopolies. But the thing is, the traits are all throughout humanity. How to keep your job by showing initiative, like scraping brand new chassis to make sure they start rusting. But that's a guaranteed way to get promotion in some of these companies. But human nature too is cunning. It's very cunning and very deceptive, very often. And as the culture goes down this hole into complete greed factor, and it has been for a long time, the worse it becomes. These traits come to the fore. That's why big bank managers are given sometimes quite a few $1 million bonus at Christmas and things like that, where really they're supposed to be out of business. It takes care of other folks' money, and the money at one time used to go back to the people who deposited their cash. Not anymore, as you well know. Because you live in the age of greed is good. Greed is good. So now you've got plastic cars with aluminum chassis and frames. And good luck, folks. Good luck. You better look for something that's still made of steel right now. It's not in bad shape, because probably by the year 2021, you'd be lucky to get a car at all that can actually drive and last for more than 2 or 3 years. That's how things really are. But we're living in a planned system. Every area of your life has been planned. As I say, a communitarian must get pushed through rapidly, and it is being pushed through, by the way, with other smart cities run by smart people who are all part of the smart education and their own smart categories and smart universities, all to manage you, because you are the human herd, as they say. That's what they call us, the herd, managing the herd. Now, Singapore is a test site for many things that are put across the world eventually, because it's a small, well-managed little society. And this article is from CNET, and it says Singapore plans to be the world's first smart nation. And the city-state unveils plans for sensors that can help manage traffic congestion, detect air pollutants, and even remind you to take your trash out. So it says the new plan aims to turn Singapore into the world's first smart nation, unveiled by the island state's Infocom Development Authority. It's called IDA. Isn't that sweet too? At the opening of the Communic Asia trade show today. Trials will begin soon in the Jurong Lake District, a new urban hub about 40 minutes from the city centre. Above-ground boxes connected to fibre optic lines will be deployed across the country at street lights or bus stops. The new boxes can be hooked up to sensors that can detect air pollutants, heavy rainfall or traffic jams. One particularly Singaporean idea is for sensors that can report how full rubbish bins are, paired with cameras that can detect litter and remind litter bugs to pick up their trash. I knew folk years ago that went there for a visit, and literally, if a bit of paper falls out your pocket when you're pulling your wallet out or something, not that you need your wallet anymore. Most of them, I think it's like the first cashless nation. Then it's like you just committed a murder or something. That's a huge crime there. It's like a police state. And you need your ID card. Long before 9/11 happened across the world, you need your ID card there to get on buses and trains and everything else. It's all cashless, you see. But it says, given the country's tiny landmass, not much bigger than the city of San Francisco, it sounds more like a smart city. But while the scenario sounds tailor-made for a happy civic society, privacy remains a concern, as does funding. Well, the thing is, you see, that all the cell phone stuff, all the data is being funneled through into all the agencies there and security agencies and so on, as they bring everything together with their fibre, internet access systems and cell phone systems. But and they've even made it cheaper there to get very high-speed internet. They got, I think it's 1 gigabits per second service, similar to that offered by Google Fibre, and you can get it for $50 a month. Which is, it's about $50 US. So that's how they do things. That's how they get folk to go. Same, we all know this too. They make it a bit cheaper to start with, and you'll say, God, that's really cheap. If when they give you it free, beware. But watch, anything that's free is a big con to get info from you. They call them mouse traps. They bait it saying it's free, and everybody rushes in like crazy. Or they give you it cheap. But it's not to suit, and you're paying so government agencies can monitor you. Quite amazing, isn't it? But that's a Singapore one too. And in this article 2, it says, Smart Cities sensors ready for rollout, Casey tells Web Summit. It says we've put sensors on 40 bikes in Dublin, Ireland, and right now they're feeding back as data about pollution, traffic congestion, you name it, says the PCH boss. And it says Casey, the founder of $1 billion turnover PCH, has predicted a smart cities sensor project demonstrated at the Dublin Web Summit could be rolled out in cities around the world. He said PCH has invested in the project along with the Tyndall National Institute, the TSSG Waterford, and the National College of Art and Design, and Vodafone Ireland. This is a phenomenal project. We put sensors on 40 bikes in Dublin. Right now they're feeding back us data about pollution, traffic congestion, and you name it. There's so many applications coming from Ireland. He said, I can see it being big in Chinese cities, but why stop there? Every city needs this, he says. You think it's all so you can see how much pollution's around? Do you really think that? Do you really believe that rubbish? And it says, Kieran Drain, what a strange name that, Kieran Drain, eh? Is it the brain drain? Chief Executive of Tyndall said, this is a smart city. The sensors we're trialling in Dublin today are small, but we'll get them even smaller and lighter. Knowing about air quality and traffic all over the city can help cities plan better. Really? For what? Also said the trials called the City Sense project has lots of implications for individuals. If you've got bad asthma, it can tell you whether you should get out. How many folk have asthma? If you want to go to work quickly, it can tell you what the traffic is like in real time. Casey said he had visited the Tyndall National Institute many times and wanted to introduce its research to startups going through PCH's accelerator in San Francisco called Highway 1. Tyndall has so many ideas we can help be commercialized, he said. We want our entrepreneurs to tap into the phenomenal things they are doing. You think it's all about pollution? Do you really believe that? Nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. It's all part of the totalitarian system of complete observation in the totalitarian information system we're living under today, to get better and better for those very, very purposes. Quite something. And also, everybody forgets this because we're bombarded with news, as I say. Most of it's hype to terrify you. And that always takes the biscuit because human people will always go to things that terrify you before you look at any other story because you're scared stiff, you see. You might save yourself. That's what you think naturally if you read the terrifying or listen to terrifying stuff first, you see. But when you're doing all that, you're missing all the other things that are really going to hit you because the terrifying stuff generally doesn't materialize. Everything's done incrementally as you're trained and you adapt. But it says tens of thousands of inner city Brisbane residents have woken this morning to the stark reality of life inside the G20 red zone, where flying kites and carrying eggs could attract increased scrutiny from thousands of extra police. The declared zone stretching from the South Bank to Kelvin Grove, Bowen Hills, Fortitude Valley and Woolloongabba has been established in a bid to stop the violence that crippled other G20 host cities like Toronto in 2010, where police were overwhelmed by the mass disorder which included rioters torching cars, trashing businesses and attacking officers. As residents digested the news, fences and barricades began going up around South Brisbane as streets became no-go zones. And it says the 6,000 strong police force they're putting up for this will be armed with additional powers from today as 1,500 interstate and international recruits, interesting, international recruits for the cops, are briefed and formally sworn in as part of a special G20 police force. So now you've got a G20 police force, folks, international. Isn't that something, eh? People face fines up to $5,500 for possessing any of the 70 prohibited items inside the red zone, which include weapons, handcuffs, explosives, and some placards. Well, with the weapons and handcuffs and explosives, they have to put all the cops out because they can't get in. They're the only ones with them. And it says the list also includes less obvious threats, such as reptiles and surfboards, as well as household items, including eggs, cans, and glass jars. those trying to work inside the heavily guarded restricted zone at South Bank around major hotels will face military-style checkpoints. There's democracy for you. And that one they mentioned there in Toronto in 2010, I remember, and it was on the web, of course, because people would, luckily enough, can photograph an awful lot of stuff today. But they actually hear the cops saying that the rights inside that area were completely suspended, and that this wasn't part of Canada during this whole meeting. The area around there wasn't a part of Canada, so you didn't have rights if you went into it. Democracy. People still vote, you know. Still vote. Isn't that astonishing? Yeah. So it's called the Red Zone. And it says, it's all about really what they can't bring in and so on. That's all what it's about. Crowd management, public order, motorcades, etc., etc. So, and have their big meals, you know, their 20-course meals, these big meals, because they generally have that, at least 20 courses, as they start talking about how to implement austerity amongst the general masses. Normal stuff, you see. And also, what's really interesting, that's getting missed by most folk, is the big test, or they call it stress tests, that the big banks were told to put on them by the Bank for International Settlements and the IMF to test them, supposedly, so they won't have an immediate other crash. But they know they're going to have another crash, of course, and the stress tests are all part of it to see if it's ready to crash. Because, you see, the bail-ins go into law, they're activated on January the 1st next year. Just in a couple of months' time, that's going to be in vogue. And that they'll start grabbing all your cash at the bank for their investors, but they'll take all the depositors' money. It's normally called theft, but not when you make it legal, so it's not called theft anymore. Anything that's illegal hasn't been passed is okay. It's quite amazing to run the legal system, isn't it? Just by changing words, something that's forbidden and illegal becomes legal. Depends who you are, though, of course, and who's doing something. But it says the European Central Bank has published previously secret correspondence in which it pressed the Irish government to seek a financial bailout. And it's from the BBC. It says the bank's former president, Jean-Claude Trichet, wrote to the Irish finance minister in November 2010. He threatened to cut off emergency funding to the country's bank. There's choices for you. Mm-hmm. Trichet said the support could only continue if the Irish government made a written commitment that it would seek financial support. So you had to put a commitment that you would seek financial support. The letter to the finance minister, Brian Lenihan, who has since died, said there should be a commitment to fiscal consolidation, which means austerity or cuts in public spending and tax increases to reduce the government's borrowing needs. This European Union has been wonderful, isn't it? With its European Central Bank and all that, dictating to all the other countries. We've had such bliss since then. This utopia is here. Folk just don't notice it. They're too busy worrying and going into austerity. But it says Ireland applied for financial help 2 days later and has received loans from the European Union, the International Monetary Fund, and some individual countries, including Britain. The total foreign assistance agreed was £67.5 billion, which is, I guess, 52.8 billion British pounds. I'm not sure. No, it's euros. 67.5 billion euros, which is 52.8 billion pounds. Though in the event, it was not all paid out. So, blackmail's blackmail. What kind of choice is that? You know, what kind of choice is that? And who encouraged them all to give out, the big banks in Ireland, to give all these loans out in the first place? The same group that's now, demanding that they sign these agreements. It's quite amazing, isn't it? But they don't make these things illegal, all this blackmailing stuff and so on. And then South Africa suffers another credit rating downgrade as well, which is nothing new, because they want... you understand, this article actually says, BBC again, the ratings agency Moody's has downgraded South Africa's sovereign debt rating. We've just all forgotten that Moody's and a few other ones, Standard & Poor's and so on, all have other big clients. They don't work for free, if that's what you think, and give out all these stats about things. They have big clients, and the big clients are often the big banks that lend out, you see. So if they can get Moody's to downgrade a country, then that country's government, when it borrows money, must pay a higher interest rate when it's been downgraded. This is great for the big banks, the international money lenders. Everything is such a racket. It really is. Such a racket. Quite some, isn't it? Quite some. What can you do, eh? And meanwhile, too, it says that they're blaming the South African miners, the guys that are down the mines there and getting all the diamonds out for the rich corporations and things. And they get paid pennies, but they're asking for demanding more money. So what do they do? This is again blackmail again. Oh, well, the country is going under if you don't get back to work and probably take a pay loss. That's how it'll work out, you find. That's how things always work out. In democracies, Quite some. And also, this little article here too, is from a site called Alice Through the Looking Glass. It says, Children Count Survey in a World That Counts. It says, concerns have been raised by a local councillor about a controversial children's survey for 9 to 16-year-olds, which he feels are inappropriate and intrusive. Councillor Tom Marshall has been questioned whether the survey includes questions about drug taking, this is for 9-year-olds, relationships with parents, thieving, knives and drugs. But also, by the way, it has things in it about anal sex, asking if the children have had it yet. I guess I'll put them into rehab if they haven't, because apparently it's the end thing. It says, speaking to the news, Claire Marshall said, these surveys are akin to unsolicited phone calls that are received and are an unsolicited intrusion into family circumstances. It's all data collection as they get into what's going on in the families. The language is inappropriate for a number of children. Questions regarding thieving and drugs are being presented almost as if these activities are normalized. Many parents would be most unhappy that there's any suggestion that their children are in the minority for not even contemplating these things, and that's true. Especially if it's the politically correct things that they're pushing to do with sex and things like that, all kinds of sex and stuff. You see, if they're not doing it, there's something wrong with them, apparently. Amazing how normals are always changed at 180 degrees, like fads, you see. Isn't it? One time they burnt witches, now they've got their organisations everywhere. And they're all new agey and trendy. It says questions on relationships with parents and guardians are clearly inappropriate and can be used to instigate the named person with interventions at some point in the future. They've got Gerfec there too, and I've read articles many times in the past. Go into the archive section at cuttingthroughthematrix.com and you can read those particular articles, because Scotland's definitely a test bed for intrusion into, again, smart management of families, you see. Meaning your betters will basically, the state, in other words, will literally rear you from birth to death. Now you're with appointed counsellors that go in there for every child born there. Smart, isn't it? Very smart. And the parents will be sitting back like the peasantry as these people strut in the door and right to the child and off to do whatever they do with them, which probably isn't very pleasant at all, knowing them, because there's an awful lot of pervs out there these days, especially in those kind of fields. But that's the life we live in, folks, and you're looking for sanity in it. Are you looking for sanity? When 9/11 happened that night on the radio, I said, the hardest thing from now on, because I knew all the whole agenda was going to get rammed through. The hardest thing from now, under the guise of terrorism, of course, the hardest thing from now on will be to hold on to your sanity as we go through all of this. And it's going to be for the rest of your lives, as you're updated and reprogrammed to adapt into the next step and the next step, and so many different areas of your life. You see? It's all done by smart people, working for smart organizations in your smart little community. And you give them all their data on your smartphone, etc., etc. Smart. Smart's got double meaning too. It means if someone strikes you, it can smart, it can hurt. Think about it, folks. All these folk that are hurting you, and you don't even know it. Think about it. Well, I hope you're all surviving out there as we're plunging into the winter with our new the new terminology they keep coming out with, the solar vortexes and northern polar vortexes, and oh my goodness, it sounds all sci-fi, doesn't it? As the north wind comes down from the North Pole and blasts us all with cold air, because apparently the North Pole's melting. And which I would have thought it got warmer if that was but no, it's getting colder, you see. It's like O'Brien in Orwell's 1984. As he says to Winston, when Winston's really out on it, he's been tortured and drugged and everything else, and O'Brien, the torturer, says, if I tell you, Winston, I can fly, then I can fly, and you'll believe it. You see? That's where we are today. Don't use logic, whatever you do, because it doesn't come into the picture. In fact, logic was trained out of you at junior school. The teacher doesn't want your logic on things. They have agendas to put forth. It's called the curriculum. And you get the proper brainwashing to be approved and get that quality approval stamp as they pass you a little certificate. That means you're fit enough and dumb enough to work in their system. You see? So life's a bit of a joke, as I say. Definitely a bit of a joke if you stand back and just sort of look at it. And it's getting crazier all the time, as O'Brien teaches you that he can fly if he wants to, and you can't because you're just a little old Jew. And East Asia is our ally today, and it'll be our enemy tomorrow. And if you parrot him on that, you'll say, "Oh no, East Asia has always been our ally." You can't win, you see, by using the facts that they hand to you to debate using your logic. You can't win. It's not meant that you win. You're meant to be trained to doubt your own logic. That's the whole point of it all. Perception management, not what is, but how you're going to perceive it. You see? Well, from Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night. Your gods go with you.